Every house, every king, and every battle has its own truth. But there are stories older than crowns, darker than the night, and more dangerous than any blade. They were never written in books. They were whispered to fire, to the trees, and to the dead gods. And today, we dare to uncover one of them. The snows had melted from the northern woods, leaving behind a hush that felt older than spring. The war of the long night had ended, and man and beast alike drew breath again beneath the pale sun. Yet in the deep fastnesses of the forest, beyond the black rivers and the whispering birch, the children of the forest lingered still. Few in number now, they were ghosts to most, half-believed tales told by mothers to frighten children into bed. But they were real, and their hearts beat with a sorrow that the ages could not heal. Leaf, who had seen 10,000 summers, stood beside a heart tree whose face was carved in forgotten days. The red sap flowed like tears. She pressed her small, bark-brown hand to its trunk and whispered words in the old tongue that no man remembered. "We have endured," she said softly. "But to what end?" Around her gathered 5 others, her kin and kind. They were small as children, yet their eyes were as deep as wells of time. They had fought beside the last greenseers, had seen the dead rise and the sky burn, and now they were few indeed. The woods that had once sung with their laughter were silent. The caves that had held their songs echoed only with wind. The eldest among them, a seer called Moss-Eye, spoke. His hair was pale as spider silk, his skin dappled with the green of moss and lichen. "The humans thrive again," he murmured, his voice like rustling leaves. "Their fires spread, their castles rise, but our power wanes. The trees do not answer as they once did." Leaf turned toward him, the faint glimmer of gold in her eyes. "There is still one place," she said. "A cave in the frost fangs beneath the northern peaks. There the last roots of the great weirwood lie entwined. I dreamed of it in the long night. I saw a light there, green and pure. Perhaps hope." The others stirred uneasily. "That place is cursed," said Fern the youngest. "The Night's Watch abandoned it long ago. The free folk say it swallows men whole." "All things born of power draw fear," Leaf replied. "But if the roots die, so too do we. And if they live—" The wind moaned through the branches, carrying the distant cry of a dire wolf. It was a sound both lonely and proud. Moss-Eye lowered his head. "Then we go," he said. "Better to die in search of life than fade into memory." Thus began their journey. They moved by moonlight, small shapes flitting between trunks, never seen, never heard. They crossed half-frozen rivers and fields of brittle grass. Once they glimpsed men, black brothers rebuilding the wall's ruined watchtowers, but the children kept to the shadows. Men no longer remembered them, and it was better so. On the third night, as snowflakes drifted from a gray sky, they found the camp of wildlings near a dead oak. Leaf motioned for silence, but Fern, curious as ever, peered through the brush and gasped. The wildlings were starving, gaunt faces, hollow eyes, huddled around a dying fire. One of them, a woman with red hair tangled with ice, clutched a child to her breast. "They are dying," Fern whispered. "We could help them." Leaf shook her head. "We cannot save them all. The age of men belongs to men." But the words caught in her throat, for she saw in that woman's eyes something that stirred an old ache. Once, long ago, they had made pacts with the first men. Once they had shared fire and blood. That night, as they rested beneath an ancient elm, the forest spoke. A raven landed near Leaf and croaked thrice. "South," it seemed to say. South, south, south. Moss Eye's blind eyes gleamed white in the moonlight. It is a sign. Others walk the same road as we. And indeed, others did. Far to the south, at the Citadel in Old Town, a maester named Alistair of House Roxton had found an ancient scrap of parchment, fragment of a legend older than Valyria. It spoke of the Cave of Roots, where the first green seer had bound life and death together. Alistair was not like most maesters. His chain held a single link of weirwood, carved by his own hand. He had studied the children's lore in secret, scorned by his fellows. Now, with winter's end, he dreamed of discovery and of power. He set sail from Old Town aboard a merchant vessel, bound for Eastwatch by the sea. The captain thought him mad. "No man goes north in spring," the sailor warned. "The ice breaks and crushes ships." But Alistair only smiled, pale eyes glinting. "No man," he said, "but perhaps one who seeks what men have forgotten." As the ship vanished into fog, the raven that had spoken to Leaf rose from its branch and flew northward. The world was stirring again. By the time the children reached the foothills of the Frostfangs, a storm was rising. Thunder rolled like the drums of war, and the snow fell thick as wool. They took shelter in a hollow tree, huddled close as the wind screamed. Fern trembled. "Will we find it, Leaf?" Leaf brushed a hand over the child's hair, soft as moss. "We must," she said, "for if we fail, the songs will end." In the heart of the storm, deep beneath the mountain, something ancient listened. It had slept through the long night, waiting for voices to return. The roots stirred faintly, sensing the children's approach, and something else, far darker, that followed in their wake. For not all that walked after the long night had turned to dust, and some shadows had learned to wear the faces of men. The storm raged for 3 nights and 3 days without mercy. The mountains groaned beneath its weight, and the old trees bowed like weary kings before the wind. When at last the skies broke open and the snows began to thin, Leaf stepped from the hollow tree and looked upon the white world beyond. All sound had been swallowed by the storm's fury. Now only silence remained. The children moved carefully through the drifts, their small forms half hidden beneath cloaks of bark and moss. Fern trudged beside Leaf, her eyes wide and uncertain. "The storm carried whispers," she said softly. "Voices I did not know." Leaf's golden gaze flicked toward her. "What did they say?" "They asked for warmth," Fern murmured, "and for blood." Moss Eye stopped at that, his blind eyes glimmering like polished stones. "The dead are never far," he said. "Even now their memories cling to the cold." They pressed on through the forested slopes of the Frostfangs. Once, these mountains had been a fortress for the free folk, hunters, raiders, clans that bowed to no king. But now they were near empty, save for wolves and the crows that followed them. Yet the children were not alone in their passage. Footprints, large and human, marked the snow. Leaf crouched to examine them. "Men travel ahead," she said. 5, perhaps 6, heavy with gear. Moss Eye touched the prints with a trembling hand. "These are fresh, 2 days old at most." They moved in silence after that, the snow crunching softly beneath their small feet. The path wound higher into the mountains until the trees thinned and the air turned bitter cold. There they found the first sign of what awaited them, a shattered camp, half buried in snow, with torn tents and blackened bones. Fern's breath caught. What happened here? "Men happened," Leaf said grimly. She brushed aside the snow and found a broken banner, a crude black hand painted upon a tattered cloth. "The Thens," she whispered, "or what's left of them." The dead men's faces were pale and twisted, their throats cut. Whatever had slain them had done so swiftly and without mercy. Among the bodies, Leif found a strange token, a silver medallion etched with the 7-pointed star of the Faith of the Seven. "Southron faith," Mossai muttered. "What business has a Meister's mark among the wildlings?" Leif turned the medallion in her hand. The metal was cold, and the sigil gleamed faintly. "Someone from the citadel walks this path," she said. "And if he seeks the cave, we are not the only ones drawn by old magic." That night, they camped beneath an overhang of stone. The air was still, heavy with frost. Leif sat awake while the others slept, her thoughts troubled. In her dreams, she saw again the cave, its mouth wide and dark, roots like pale veins reaching toward her. A whisper echoed through the vision. "Remember the pact." She awoke with a start. At dawn they climbed higher, where the rocks jutted like broken teeth from the mountainside. The trail narrowed, the wind keened. At midday they came upon a narrow crevasse where the snow had gathered thick. Leif stepped carefully, and the ground gave way beneath her. She fell, striking hard against ice, and the world went white. When she woke, the others were peering down from above, their small faces rimmed by light. "Leif," Fern cried, "are you hurt?" "I will live," Leif called back. She stood, brushing frost from her cloak, and then froze. The place where she had fallen was no mere hole in the ice. A tunnel gaped before her, its walls smooth and glistening, carved by something older than men, or winter. Mossai's voice echoed from above. "What do you see?" Leif's heart beat fast. "The path," she whispered. "The one I dreamed of." One by one, the children climbed down to join her. The tunnel sloped gently downward, lit by a pale green glow that pulsed like the heart of the earth. The air smelled of sap and stone. They moved cautiously, torches unneeded, for the walls themselves seemed alive with light. At the tunnel's end, they found a chamber vast as a hall, its roof veined with roots that shone faintly crimson. In its center rose a weirwood tree, half turned to stone. Its face was ancient and sorrowful, and the red sap that dripped from its eyes had frozen into glassy tears. Fern approached it with reverence. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Leif stepped closer and laid her hand upon the bark. The warmth that spread through her was not of this world. She saw flashes, visions, of greenseers long dead, of ravens in flight, of the first pact between man and child beneath the canopy of a younger world. Then another vision seized her, a man in maester's robes standing before this very tree, a torch in his hand, eyes bright with hunger. Behind him, a wildling woman with red hair and a child at her side. Leif pulled back, gasping. "They were here," she said, "not long ago." Mossai's voice was grave. "Then we are too late?" "No," Leif said slowly. "They did not find what they sought. The heart of the roots still sleeps." Yet as her words faded, a faint rumble echoed through the cavern. The frozen sap upon the weirwood began to crack, one long fracture splitting the face from brow to chin. A breath like winter stirred the air. "The tree remembers," Mossai whispered. They turned toward the tunnel, intending to flee, but a shadow moved there, tall, human, and cloaked in furs. A man's voice called out, echoing strangely. "Who walks in the caves of the old gods?" Leif stiffened. The speaker stepped into the glow. His beard was thick with frost, his eyes sharp and searching. Behind him came 3 others, wildlings armed with crude spears. "Who are you?" Leif asked, her voice low and wary. The man studied her with disbelief and fear. "By the gods," he breathed. "The tales were true. You're one of them." He lowered his spear slowly. "Name's Roth, of the Ice River clans. We follow a southerner, a maester who swore he could bring back the fire of the earth itself." Leif's eyes narrowed. "Alistair Roxton." Roth nodded grimly. "He went deeper 3 nights past. Said the roots spoke to him. We waited, but he did not return." Moss-Eye looked toward the trembling weirwood. "Then he has woken something that should have slept." From the depths of the cave came a low, rumbling sound, like the grinding of stone. The green light flared brighter, casting long shadows across the walls. Fern clutched Leif's hand. "What is it?" she whispered. Leif's face was pale. "The past," she said, "and it is not finished with us." The cavern shook as though the mountain itself were drawing breath. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the pale roots above them pulsed with light. Green one heartbeat, red the next. The wildlings drew back, crossing themselves with fearful mutters, while the children stood rooted, eyes fixed upon the weirwood's face. A crack echoed through the chamber. The frozen sap that sealed the weirwood's eyes split apart, and liquid crimson welled forth anew. The tree seemed to sigh, a deep, sorrowful sound that filled every corner of the cave. Then came a voice, faint yet vast, rising not from the air, but from the roots beneath their feet. "Who stirs the blood of the old gods?" Fern whimpered and clung to Leif's cloak. Even Moss-Eye bowed his head, trembling. Leif alone stepped forward, though her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. "We are the last of your children," she said. "We seek the heart of the roots, that our people may endure." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the tree's eyes opened. 2 red lights that burned with memory. Visions flooded the cavern. The first men cutting down the forests, the children unleashing storms and shadows, the pact sworn in blood beneath the Isle of Faces, the rise of men, the fall of magic, the breaking of the world. "You seek endurance," the voice murmured, "but all things that endure must change." The light faded. The weirwood's eyes closed once more, but the rumbling did not cease. From a fissure near the roots came a glow far brighter than before. Green fire, wild and living. Moss-Eye whispered, "The sap of the world tree. Pure magic." Roth took a step back. "That's what the master wanted," he said. "Said it could bind life to stone, make men as gods. We thought him mad, till we saw the lights." "Where did he go?" Leif demanded. Roth pointed toward a narrow tunnel at the back of the cavern, where the light flickered strongest. "Down there." "But no one who went after him came back." Leif turned to Moss-Eye. "We must go. If he wakes what lies below, the mountains will fall, and worse may follow." The old seer nodded slowly. "The blood of man and the blood of root were never meant to mingle again. I will go with you." Fern clutched Leif's hand. "I'm coming too." "No," Leif said softly. "Stay with the wildlings. Guard the way out." Fern's eyes filled with tears, but she obeyed. The rest followed Leif, Moss-Eye beside her, and 2 wildlings armed with torches behind. The tunnel sloped downward, twisting like the inside of some great beast. The air grew warm and damp, filled with a low humming, as if 1,000 distant voices whispered just beyond hearing. They came at last to a chamber vast as a cathedral. At its center stood Alistair Roxton. His maester's robes were torn, his hair wild, his chain blackened by soot. Before him burned a pool of green fire, seeping from the cracked roots of the world tree. The man's eyes gleamed with madness and wonder. "Do you see?" he cried when he beheld them. "Do you see what lies beneath the world of men? The power of the first dawn." Leaf stepped forward cautiously. "You meddle with forces beyond your ken," she said. "That fire is not meant for mortal hands." Alistair laughed, spreading his arms. "Not mortal, no. But what if men need not be mortal? The old magic died because your kind hid it away. I will restore it. I will make the Age of Wonder live again." He reached into the flame. The fire clung to his flesh, and instead of burning, it merged with him. His eyes turned green as emeralds, his veins glowing beneath his skin. The wildlings cried out in terror. Moss Eye shouted, "Fool! The power you draw was never meant to dwell in one heart." But Alistair only smiled, and the smile was no longer human. The roots around the chamber began to writhe, snaking across the floor like serpents. One lashed out, striking a wildling from his feet and dragging him screaming into the pit. Leaf darted forward, chanting in the old tongue, her voice sharp and swift as the wind. The roots hesitated. "Release it, Meister," she cried. "You'll wake the sleeper." "The sleeper?" Alistair sneered. "Another of your tales to keep power from man's grasp." He thrust both hands into the pool, drawing up a column of fire. "I am beyond tales." Then the ground split open. A shape began to rise from the depths, massive, half stone, half flesh. It was not a man nor beast, but something older, a giant whose body was bound in roots and ice. Its face was blank, smooth, save for two hollows where eyes might have been. Moss Eye fell to his knees. "The first green seer," he whispered in awe and dread. He bound his soul to the roots at the world's dawn. The creature stirred, its mouth opened, and the sound that came forth was like the cracking of mountains. The green fire surged outward, licking across the walls. Alistair screamed as the light consumed him, his form melting into the roots. For a heartbeat, his face shone within the glow, and then was gone. Leaf seized Moss Eye's arm. "We must seal it again," she shouted above the roar. "How?" "The old way." Together they began to chant, their voices weaving the words of binding, calling on the memories of earth and tree. The roots trembled, drawing back from the open pit. The fire dimmed, then flickered, then fell to embers. The giant sank slowly into the depths once more. When at last silence returned, Leaf fell to her knees, trembling. The chamber was dark save for the faint red glow of the weirwood sap running along the walls. Moss Eye touched her shoulder gently. "It is done." "Not done," Leaf whispered. "Merely delayed." They turned and made their way back toward the main cavern. Fern ran to meet them, tears streaking her face. The mountain groaned. She cried, "I thought you were lost." Leaf gathered her close. "We are here. But the world below is restless. We must leave these halls forever." Rolf stood near the weirwood, staring at its face. "What of him? The Meister?" he asked. Leaf looked toward the sealed tunnel. "He chose his fate. The roots remember all things. His mind is now among them, dreaming." The wildlings gathered their things and prepared to depart. As they climbed toward the surface, the last of the green light faded from the stones. Above, dawn had come, pale and cold, washing the snow-covered mountains in silver. Fern looked back one last time. "Will it sleep, Leaf? Truly sleep?" Leaf's gaze lingered on the cave mouth, where the faintest breath of green mist still drifted. "For now," she said. "But magic is like spring after winter. It always returns." They vanished into the wild, leaving behind only the whisper of wind through the pines. Deep below, unseen by any living eye, the weirwood's roots pulsed once more, slowly, patiently, as though the earth itself dreamed of the age of the children yet to come. The wind that swept down from the Frostfangs was sharp as broken glass. Leaf led her kin and the surviving wildlings eastward through the valleys, where the snow melted into rivers of gray water that ran toward the sea. Behind them, the mountains smoldered faintly under a red dawn. Though no fire could be seen, the earth itself seemed to breathe, restless, as though something beneath had merely rolled over in its slumber. Rolf walked beside Leaf, his face grim. "You've done what none of us could," he said, "sealed a nightmare that should have stayed forgotten." Leaf's expression was distant. "Sealed, yes, but such dreams do not die. They wait, they whisper." The wildling spat into the snow. "Then we'll hope the whispering stays beneath stone." By the time the sun climbed high, they had reached the edge of the deep forest. Leaf halted there, gazing back one last time at the white peaks. "That place was sacred once," she said softly. "A heart of the world. Men and children both drew power from it. Now it is a grave." Moss-Eye joined her. "You did what you must. The old ways are dying, Leaf. We cannot hold back the tide." She looked toward the south. "Then we find where the tide has not yet reached." The wildlings parted from them there. Rolf left them with food, a horn of water, and a promise. "If the south ever drives you from the woods, come to the ice river. We'll remember who saved us." Leaf bowed her head. "Few men keep such promises, but perhaps your blood runs truer than most." When he and his kin had vanished into the white expanse, the children turned south. They moved through the forests like spirits, following the rivers that flowed toward the neck. For many days they saw no man, only ravens that watched from the branches and wolves that shadowed their path at a distance. On the 9th night, they found a strange sight, a camp of black tents upon the edge of a frozen lake with fires burning bright. Men in black cloaks moved about, brothers of the night's watch. Leaf led her kin to the ridge above the camp. "They rebuild what fell," Moss-Eye murmured. "The wall still stands, yet its shadow grows thin." One of the men below lifted his face toward the ridge as though he sensed their gaze. His eyes caught the firelight, gray and keen as a hawk's. Leaf drew back quickly, but it was too late. "He saw us," Fern whispered. "Then we move swiftly," Leaf said. "We cannot be taken for wights or spirits." But before they could depart, the man below called out, "Stay your flight, I mean you no harm." His voice carried clearly in the cold air. Against her better judgment, Leaf paused. The man stepped forward alone, leaving his comrades behind. He removed his hood, revealing a young face, stern but not unkind, with the look of the North in his blood. "I am Sir Benyar Stark," he said, "sworn brother of the Watch." At that name, Leaf froze. "Stark," she murmured. "That blood again." Benyar bowed slightly. "You are the children, are you not? I was taught your name in the old songs." Fern gasped softly, but Leaf silenced her with a look. "You believe in songs that most men have forgotten." "Some songs never die," Benyar said. "My grandsire told me that the Starks and the children once shared oaths, that the weirwoods hear both our prayers. I saw you watching from the ridge, and I thought, perhaps the gods have not turned from us after all." Leaf studied him carefully. His breath smoked in the air. His hand rested lightly on the hilt of his sword, yet she sensed no deceit in him. The Stark name had bound itself to the old gods in truth. "Why do you rebuild the Watch's camps?" she asked. "The dead have fallen. The long night is ended." Benyar's face darkened. "For now," he said. "But cold winds still rise in the far north. There are whispers of movement beyond the shattered castles, of shadows stirring beneath the ice." Moss-Eye's blind eyes turned toward him. "We have seen such stirrings. The roots remember them." Benyar hesitated, then said, "If what you know can aid us, come to the wall. My Lord Commander would give you safe passage." Leaf shook her head slowly. "Our kind does not walk beneath stone walls or swear to men, but there may yet be need for words between us." The man nodded solemnly. "Then I will await them, should the need arise." They parted under the rising moon. Yet that night, as the children camped among the pines, Leaf's thoughts returned to the young Stark's face. She felt the pull of something older than choice, the old pact, still alive in the blood of man. The next days carried them into the southern forests, where the snow thinned and the trees grew tall and thick. Here, the songs of birds returned, and the air smelled of earth rather than frost. It was strange and beautiful, yet the children walked with unease. Fern broke the silence one morning. "If men rise again in the north, what will they do when they find the caves?" "Pray they never do," Leaf said. "The roots guard their own, but men dig deep when they desire power." Moss-Eye nodded. "The Meister's madness was not born of him alone. Men crave what they cannot keep, the touch of the old gods, the promise of forever." They came at last to a clearing where a single great weirwood stood, its face worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Leaf knelt before it, placing her hand upon its trunk. "Here we rest," she said. The others settled among the roots, their small forms blending with moss and shadow. For the first time in many moons, they allowed themselves to sleep without fear. But Leaf did not sleep. She listened to the weirwood's whispers, faint as breath. Beneath its roots, she felt the thrum of life, the deep, slow pulse of the world, and mingled within it, faint but unmistakable, was another presence. A voice that should not have been there. "Do you hear me, child of the old blood?" Her eyes flew open. "Alistair?" she whispered. "Once I was so named," the voice replied, distant and hollow, as though spoken through water. "Now I am part of the roots. You sought to seal the magic, yet you bound me to it instead. I see what sleeps below. I know what comes." Leaf's hands trembled. "You should not be awake." "Nor should you," the voice answered. "The long night ended, but the balance is broken. The fire of life is no longer still. It feeds upon itself. When men dream of gods, the roots remember, and the world changes." Then the voice faded, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the wind. Moss-Eye stirred nearby. "Leaf?" She drew her cloak tighter. "Nothing," she said. "Only the wind." But her gaze lingered on the sky where the northern lights faintly shimmered. The world was quiet, for now. Yet somewhere deep beneath the frost fangs, the old magic breathed, restless, dreaming of the day it would rise again. Leaf closed her eyes and whispered to the weirwood, "Let it sleep a while longer." And for the first time since the long night, the godswood answered not with silence, but with a sigh. Spring crept slowly into the north, though few dared call it by that name. The air still held the bite of frost, and the snowmelt ran cold as glass through the gullies and riverbeds. Yet the forests were waking. Buds swelled upon the branches, the ground softened, and faint green shoots pushed through the old snow like the first breath after a long sleep. In that hush of renewal, the children of the forest walked unseen among the trees. Days had turned to weeks since they had left the frost fangs behind, and still the memory of the cavern's light burned in Leif's thoughts. She dreamed of the weirwood's face and the whisper of the Meister's voice that would not fade. They followed the green fork south, where the forest grew thicker and the rivers broader. Fern gathered berries from the bushes that lined the bank, humming softly in the old tongue. Moss-Eye trailed behind, leaning on his staff, his blind eyes turned toward the sun. "We walk farther from the cold," he said, "but not from the shadow." Leif looked up from the river's edge. "You feel it too." He nodded slowly. The roots whisper restlessly beneath the soil. The weirwoods no longer sleep as they once did. They murmur of something stirring, something vast. Fern glanced between them, her brow furrowed. "Another storm?" "Not of snow," Leif said. "Of men." That very night her words proved true. They made camp in a hollow beneath the trees, but as the stars wheeled overhead, the forest trembled faintly. The sound of hooves came first, slow, measured, too heavy for deer. Then voices, muffled but sharp, and the glint of torches moving through the darkness. Leif motioned for silence. They crept forward through the undergrowth until they saw the riders, 5 men in mail and leather, bearing the crowned stag of Baratheon upon their cloaks. Their leader was a broad-shouldered knight with a dark beard and hard eyes. "Sir Darren," one of the soldiers said, "we're far from the King's Road. You sure of your maps?" The knight spat into the leaves. "Aye, I'm sure. The Maester's papers said the weirwood groves still grow thick in these parts. The Hand wants every one of them mapped and measured. The king means to fell the largest for his ships." Leif's heart clenched. Fell the weirwoods. Even now, when the realm was rebuilding from ruin, men thought only of timber and war. She turned to Moss-Eye, fury bright in her voice. They would cut the old gods for wood. He laid a trembling hand upon her arm. "They know not what they do." Fern's small face was pale. "We can't let them." "No," Leif whispered. "We cannot." They moved as shadows do, swift and unseen. When the soldiers made camp and built their fire, Leif whispered to the trees in the old tongue. The wind stirred, faint but sure, carrying her words from branch to branch. The forest listened. The first scream came as dawn touched the sky. One of the horses reared, wild-eyed, and fled into the trees. Another man shouted, pointing to the darkness where pale shapes flitted between trunks. The trees groaned as though alive. Roots rose from the soil, twisting around boots and ankles. "Spirits!" one of the soldiers cried. "Spirits of the old wood!" Sir Darren drew his sword. Steel cut spirits as well as men. But when his blade swung, it met not flesh, but mist. A dozen shadows moved as one, darting between firelight and gloom. Arrows of obsidian hissed through the air, black and silent. One struck a man through the throat. Another pierced the flame of the fire itself, snuffing it out. In the sudden dark, panic took hold. "Hold fast," Darren roared, but his men were already fleeing. A root snared his leg, dragging him down. When he turned his sword to hack at it, he found Leif standing before him. She was small, no taller than a child, but her eyes gleamed gold in the dim light, and her voice carried the weight of ages. "Go no farther south," she said. "Tell your king the forest is not his to claim." The knight's breath came fast. "Witch," he spat. "The gods are dead. Men rule now. Then may men share their fate," Leif said. She raised her hand, and the trees answered. The ground trembled, roots surging like serpents. The knight's torch fell, and with it, the courage of his men. Within moments, the clearing was empty, save for the whispering leaves and the flicker of dying flame. When it was done, Fern stood beside her, eyes wide. Did we kill them? Leaf shook her head. No, the forest spared them. They will live, and they will speak of what they saw. Moss Eye's voice was weary. Fear is a poor teacher, but perhaps it is the only one men will heed. They left the camp before dawn, heading deeper into the heart of the forest. The land grew older there, untouched by man. Great oaks spread their branches like kings of stone, and moss lay thick upon every root. By nightfall, they reached a grove unlike any other. A circle of 7 weirwoods stood there, their red leaves whispering softly, though no wind stirred. In the center of the circle rose a stone mound covered in ivy, and upon it rested a single white mask carved in the likeness of a greenseer's face. Leaf fell to her knees. This was their hall, she said, the last of the singers who tended the rivers before the first men came. Fern touched the mask with reverent fingers. Is it safe here? For now, Leaf said. But the world moves quickly. Men multiply, forests shrink. One day, even this grove may fall. They built a small fire of fallen branches and shared what food they had left. Moss Eye sang a low song in the old tongue, a lament for the ages when the earth had spoken freely to those who listened. His voice wavered like wind through reeds, but the grove seemed to breathe with him, as though remembering. Later, when the others slept, Leaf sat alone beside the mound. She placed her hand upon the mask and whispered, "We have no kings, no thrones, no armies, yet we endure. We have always endured." The mask was cold beneath her fingers. A voice stirred within the darkness, not the voice of Alistair this time, but something older, a whisper of the world itself. The age of the children wanes, but their songs shall root again. When the blood of man and forest mingle once more, the balance will return. Leaf bowed her head. "Then I will wait," she said softly, "even if it takes 1,000 years." The stars burned above the trees, ancient and steady. The forest slept, and the world turned toward a dawn it could not yet see. But beneath the earth, in the deep places of the roots, the old powers shifted. The past was not finished. It was only resting, gathering its breath. For every ending in Westeros was merely the seed of another beginning. Dawn bled red across the treetops. The grove was quiet, save for the sigh of wind moving through the ancient weirwoods. Leaf rose before the others, her breath misting in the cool air, and gazed toward the south. A thin veil of mist hung over the forest floor, softening the edges of the world. Yet within that fog she sensed movement, distant and uncertain, like the stirring of something half forgotten. Moss Eye joined her, leaning heavily upon his staff. "The trees whispered in the night," he said. "Their roots are troubled. Men cut deeper each year. Fire and iron are their prayers." Leaf nodded, her eyes shadowed. "The grove cannot stand alone forever. We must seek others of our kind, if any remain. Perhaps in the swamps of the Neck, where the Crannogmen dwell. They have the blood of the forest in them still." Fern stirred behind them, rubbing sleep from her eyes. "Are the Crannogmen truly kin to us?" she asked. "In part," Moss Eye said. "Their forebears mingled with the children long ago. They keep to the old gods, and their hearts still hear the song of the trees." Fern's eyes brightened. "Then we are not the last." Leaf allowed herself a faint smile. "Not yet." They broke camp at first light, leaving the grove untouched. The journey south was long and wearying. The forests grew thicker, the ground wetter, and the air heavy with the scent of moss and peat. Once they crossed the ruins of a village, charred timbers and blackened stones overgrown with ivy. Men's bones lay scattered in the mud, half buried by the years. Fern stared at them in silence. Why do men build only to destroy? Because they forget, Leaf said. They think the world is theirs alone. They have never learned that what is taken from the earth must someday be returned. That night they slept beside a still pool, its surface reflecting the stars like shards of glass. As Leaf closed her eyes, she heard faint ripples in the water, though no wind stirred. A voice rose from the depths, soft, sorrowful, and unmistakably human. Leaf! Her eyes flew open. The pool glowed faintly green, and within it she saw a face, pale, sunken, eyes alight with otherworldly fire. It was Alistair Roxton, or what remained of him. You walk far from the frost fangs, the voice said, yet you cannot flee what you awakened. Leaf knelt beside the water, her reflection mingling with his ghostly image. I sealed the heart. It sleeps again. Does it? Alistair's tone was almost tender. The magic does not sleep, child of the forest. It spreads root to river, dream to dream. I see it in the south. The weirwoods remember me now. Moss-Eye stirred behind her, sensing the change in the air. Who do you speak to? The dead, Leaf whispered. Alistair's eyes flared brighter. The dead are never silent. The roots feed on memory, and I am memory itself. You cannot undo what has been bound. The pool darkened, and his face faded. Only ripples remained, spreading outward in slow circles. When morning came, Leaf said nothing of the vision. Yet the silence between her and Moss-Eye grew heavy as they pressed on through the wetlands. By the third day, they reached the marshes of the Neck, a vast green labyrinth of water and mist. The air was thick with the cries of unseen birds. Reeds rose taller than fern, and the ground shifted treacherously beneath their feet. They had gone scarcely an hour into the swamps when a dart hissed through the air and struck Moss-Eye's staff, quivering there. Hold! Leaf cried, raising her hands. We come in peace. A voice answered from the fog. Peace is a poor word in these parts. Figures emerged from the mist, men and women small of stature, clad in green and brown, their faces painted with mud. They bore spears tipped with fishbone and obsidian. At their head stood a woman with eyes the color of marsh water. Crannog men, Moss-Eye murmured. The woman stepped forward. You are far from your forests, little ones. Few of your kind walk the world now. Leaf inclined her head, and fewer still remember us. We seek the old ways. The magic of the roots wakes again. We would warn those who yet listen. The woman studied her with a wary gaze. The trees whisper, yes. We have heard them in our dreams. But the south grows deaf, and the lords of men do not dream as we do. Fern took a step forward. Then help us, she pleaded. Together, we can keep the forest alive. A murmur ran through the Crannogmen. The leader raised her hand for silence. There are those among us who still tend the old gods. Follow, and you shall meet them. They led the children deep into the swamps. The path wound between pools of still water that glimmered like glass. Strange lights flickered beneath the surface. Fish, or perhaps something older. At last, they came to a low island where a weirwood rose from the mire, its roots drinking the dark water. Beneath it sat an old man with hair as white as bone and eyes pale as mist. I knew you would come, he said as they approached. The rivers have carried your tale. I am Howland Reed, Lord of Greywater Watch. Leaf bowed her head. Your name lives in our songs. You fought beside the Wolf Prince in the wars of men. The old man smiled faintly. Aye, long ago. But the world has changed since then, and I am but a reed clinging to old waters. What brings the children south once more? Leaf told him of the Frost Fangs, the Maester, and the power that had stirred beneath the mountain. Howland listened without interruption, his gaze distant, as though he could see through the earth itself. When she finished, he sighed. The magic of the North runs deep. The masters have long sought to bind it or destroy it, fearing what they cannot master. But power, once woken, will not sleep again. Mos Ei's voice was grave. Then what must be done? Nothing, Reed said. Not yet. The tides of the world are turning. The dragons are gone, yet their fire lingers. The Starks rebuild their keeps, and in the far south, kings rise and fall like waves upon the shore. You cannot stop such storms. You can only endure them. Leaf met his gaze. We have endured for thousands of years, but this storm may wash us away forever. Reed smiled sadly. Perhaps, or perhaps the roots will remember how to grow anew. He rose, placing a weathered hand upon the weirwood's trunk. There is a saying among my people, the river forgets nothing. Neither do the trees. Go east, to the boglands beyond the Bight. There are places where the old gods still breathe freely. If you wish your kind to live, hide there until the world forgets to look. Leaf inclined her head. We thank you, Lord of the Reed. He nodded once. The blood of the forest runs thin, but it still runs. When the next dawn comes, remember this. Men are not your enemies, only your children grown wild. One day, they may listen again. The children departed the island before nightfall. As they waded through the dark waters, Fern looked back. Howland Reed stood beneath the weirwood, motionless, his reflection rippling upon the surface of the pool like a dream half remembered. Do you think he speaks true? She asked. Leaf did not answer at once. The fog closed around them, soft and endless. I think, she said at last, that the forest will outlast us all, but whether it remembers us kindly, that I do not know. And as the mists swallowed them whole, the weirwoods of the neck whispered to one another in the tongue of roots and rivers, carrying their words far across the land. For even in silence, the children's story was not yet done. The earth had listened, and the earth never forgets. Mist clung to the marshlands like a living thing, curling around the reeds and swallowing sound. The children moved eastward under the silver light of a waning moon, their feet whispering through black water. Every pool seemed to watch them, each gnarled tree bent like a sentinel in the fog. For many nights they traveled thus, leaving the safety of Greywater's borders behind. The Crannogmen had given them food, salted fish, dried herbs, and a promise of silence. Few venture east of the boglands, Howland Reed had said. The world forgets what dwells there, and those who find it seldom return. Leaf led the way, her golden eyes steady, though weariness gnawed at her heart. Mos Ei followed close behind, his staff sinking into the soft earth with every step. Fern, light of foot and bright of spirit, walked last, watching the mist curl around her hands like ghosts. After several days, the air began to change. The marshes thinned, giving way to low hills blanketed in heather and pine. The scent of salt grew strong. The sea was near. It was Fern who first saw the smoke. Leaf, she whispered, pointing toward a ridge ahead. Fire! They crept forward silently until the trees broke, revealing a shallow bay below. A handful of wooden huts stood upon the shore, their thatched roofs half rotted, the air thick with the smell of pitch. Men moved among them, fisherfolk, gaunt and ragged, their nets hanging empty. Men this far east? Mos Ei murmured. Few should live where the tides eat the land. Desperation drives them, Leaf said. The wars of men leave no corner untouched. As they watched, a bell rang, a hollow, broken sound, and the people gathered near the water's edge. Fern squinted. What are they doing? A small boat drifted from the mist, rowed by a single figure cloaked in gray. The villagers fell to their knees as it scraped upon the sand. The cloaked one stepped ashore, and even from a distance, Leaf felt a prickle of unease. The air around the newcomer shimmered faintly, as though warped by heat or unseen power. The stranger walks among them, Moss-Eye breathed. That is no mortal shape. The figure raised a pale hand, and the villagers bowed lower still. A voice, soft, cold, and distant, carried across the water. Though Leaf could not hear the words, she felt their weight. Reverence, fear, and promise. Something stirs here, she said. Not the gods of men, but something older, wearing their faces. When night fell, the children descended to the shore. The huts were dark, their fires cold. Only the boat remained, half drifted back into the tide. They found no living soul. Only footprints in the sand that ended abruptly at the water's edge, as though the sea had swallowed them whole. Fern's voice trembled. Where did they go? Leaf knelt beside the boat, tracing her fingers over the wet wood. They followed their god into the deep. Moss-Eye's blind eyes gleamed faintly. The sea remembers its own. The drowned god was once but a whisper. Perhaps he listens again. Another power awakened, Leaf murmured. The balance tilts further still. They left the shore behind, pressing onward along the cliffs that rose above the bight. For days they walked beneath wheeling gulls and bitter wind, until the land turned wild again, bare rock, thorn, and lonely trees bent by storms. Here, the past lay close to the surface. Leaf felt it in every stone, every gust that howled through the hollows. The songs of the forest were faint but alive, buried beneath the centuries. On the fifth night, they came upon ruins, low walls of blackened stone overgrown with ivy. At its heart stood a weirwood, twisted and half dead, its red leaves scattered across the ground like dried blood. This was once a place of worship, Moss-Eye said. A hall of the first men, perhaps, before they turned from us. Fern touched the tree's trunk, her voice small. Can it hear us still? Leaf closed her eyes and pressed her palm against the bark. At first, there was only silence. Then, a heartbeat. Slow, distant, but there. The gods remember, she whispered, even when men forget. But what she felt beneath the surface was not peace. The roots trembled with unrest, carrying echoes from the far north. Cold and ancient, familiar. Moss-Eye shuddered. The sleeper stirs. Leaf opened her eyes. The Meister's spirit spreads through the roots. It reaches beyond the Frostfangs now. Fern's eyes widened. Can we stop it? Leaf's gaze drifted toward the dark horizon. Perhaps, but not with fire or stone, only with memory. That night, she dreamt. She walked through the caverns once more, their walls alive with the green fire of the world's heart. The figure of Alistair Roxton stood before the great weirwood, no longer holy man. His eyes glowed with the light of the roots, and his voice filled the air. You cannot silence me, Leaf. I am the echo of all that was lost. The forest's sorrow made flesh. Leaf raised her hand, and the dream tree answered with crimson flame. You were a man who sought to own what should have been shared, and you are a relic who fears what must change. The fire spread between them, consuming the walls. She awoke gasping, the dawn just breaking through the trees. Moss-Eye was already awake. You dreamt of him again. Yes, she said softly, and he spoke truly. We are relics. He smiled faintly. Relics are merely the seeds of the past, and seeds remember how to grow. They journeyed eastward once more until the air grew heavy with salt and the land fell away to sea. From the cliffs they looked down upon a vast expanse of gray water, rolling endlessly into mist. Fern's voice was hushed with awe. "Is this the end of the world?" Leaf looked beyond the horizon, where the clouds met the sea. "No," she said, "the world has no end, only circles." They camped that night upon the cliffs beneath a stunted pine whose roots clung to bare rock. The wind howled through the branches like a voice of mourning. Leaf stood apart from the others, staring into the dark. She thought of the frost fangs, of Alistair's warning, of the stark knight who still guarded the wall. The threads of men and forest wove together like roots beneath her feet. She spoke softly to the sea. "The age of men rises again, yet their hearts are hollow. Perhaps that is why the magic returns, to remind them of what they have forgotten." Behind her, Fern's laughter carried faintly on the wind as Moss-Eye told an old tale of the Dawn Age. For a moment, Leaf let herself believe that peace might yet endure. But far to the north, beyond the wall and the ruins of the cave, a single weirwood split with a sound like thunder. From its hollow trunk oozed green light, pulsing like a heart, and in that light the shape of a man stirred, neither dead nor living, neither flesh nor spirit. Alistair Roxton opened his eyes and smiled. "The roots remember," he whispered to the cold. "And soon, so will the world." The wind carried whispers that night, voices that did not belong to the living. Far above the cliffs, the sky churned with clouds, and the sea below murmured with an unease that even the children could feel in their bones. When dawn came, the world seemed veiled in ash-gray light, and the gulls did not cry. Leaf rose before the others. She stood upon the edge of the cliffs, cloak drawn tight about her, gazing northward where the horizon vanished into mist. Her thoughts were troubled. For 3 nights she had dreamed of fire beneath the roots, of men carving their marks upon the old woods, of the face of the weirwood cracking open once more. Each dream left her weaker, though she had not yet spoken of it. Moss-Eye approached, his steps slow but sure despite the years. "You do not rest," he said. "I cannot." The dreams grow louder. Leaf nodded, her golden eyes shadowed. The roots whisper in every corner of the world now. The sleeper stirs again. I fear our binding could not hold him. He has become part of the weirwoods themselves. Moss-Eye's blind eyes glowed faintly white. Then he speaks through the trees that once served us, through the gods we trusted. "Perhaps he is the gods now," Leaf murmured, "or their echo twisted by men's desire." Fern, waking nearby, overheard them. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. "If the roots have turned against us, where can we go?" Leaf looked down upon her, her voice soft but firm. "The forest has no enemies, only those who have forgotten how to listen." They broke camp as the first sunbeam pierced the clouds. Their journey turned inland, where the cliffs gave way to rolling hills and stony ridges. Here the world grew lonely again. The land was wild, the air sharp with pine, and the rivers ran clear and cold. On the second day, they came upon a narrow pass guarded by a fallen watchtower, its stones scattered, its gate swallowed by weeds. Moss-Eye paused before it. "Men once ruled here," he said. "A fortress of the first men, long before the Andals came." Fern touched one of the stones. "It feels wrong, cold." Leaf bent down beside her and brushed aside the moss. Beneath it, a carving emerged, a sigil of 7 eyes encircled by flame. "The symbol of the Meisters," she said grimly. "They marked this place. Perhaps Alistair was not the first. That night, they sheltered within the ruins. The moon hung pale and full above the broken walls, casting long shadows. Leaf sat apart from the others, tracing the symbol again with her fingers. 7 eyes, she whispered. 7 gods, 7 chains. They sought to bind knowledge, to name every secret. But magic dies when it is named. Moss Eye nodded. So it has ever been. The masters cut down the ravens' tongues and locked the dragons in cages of logic. Yet they never learned that some truths must remain wild, Leaf said. The wind rose suddenly, and the fire guttered low. From the darkness beyond the tower came a faint sound, metal striking stone. Fern reached for her dagger, small and black as obsidian. A figure emerged from the shadows. His cloak was torn, his face hidden by a hood. He moved like one long hunted. "Stay back," Leaf warned. The stranger raised his hands. "Peace. I mean no harm." His voice was hoarse, worn thin by cold. "Who are you?" He pulled back his hood, revealing a gaunt face framed by gray stubble. His eyes were dark and sunken, yet sharp with purpose. "A man of the Citadel once, no longer. My name is Maester Corin, though I cast off the chain years ago." Leaf studied him warily. "Few maesters wander the wilds of the north. Why have you come?" "To find what Alistair Roxton awakened," Corin said. "The ravens still whisper of him. They say a green fire burns beneath the frost fangs, and the weirwoods weep blood again." Moss Eye frowned. "What would you do with such knowledge?" "End it," the Maester said simply. "What my brothers began, he twisted." The Citadel once sought to silence magic, to bring the world to reason. But Roxton sought to master it. His folly must not spread. Leaf's gaze hardened. "And how would you end it, Maester? With chains and fire?" Corin hesitated. "With truth. There are things even the Citadel fears, records hidden in the vaults of Old Town, sealed since the doom of Valyria. They speak of the Green Seers, of a pact between blood and root that still binds the realms. If we can unmake that bond, you would sever the link between man and the forest," Leaf said quietly. "You would unmake the old gods themselves." Fern stepped forward, her eyes bright with anger. "You'd kill us. I would save you," Corin replied. "The magic binds you as much as it sustains you. It keeps you from dying, yes, but it also keeps you from living." Leaf turned away, her jaw tight. "Men always think they know what is best for the world. That is why the world bleeds." The Maester bowed his head. "Perhaps, but if we do nothing, Roxton's spirit will consume every root from here to Dorne. The forest will burn from within." A heavy silence fell. Outside, the wind howled like a mourning beast. Finally, Moss Eye spoke. If his words hold truth, then he must go where the fire began, to the frost fangs. Fern shook her head. "Back there? After all we saw?" Leaf closed her eyes. She felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her, the burden of survival, the memory of countless endings. When she opened them again, they gleamed with fierce resolve. "Yes," she said, "we must return." At dawn, they set out northward once more. The Maester followed at a distance, limping, his breath misting in the cold air. The children moved like shadows, swift and silent. For many days they crossed barren lands where even the trees had died, their pale skeletons reaching skyward like pleading hands. Fern grew quiet, and Moss Eye's strength waned. But Leaf pressed on, guided by the faint hum beneath the ground, the pulse of the roots that called them home. At last, they reached the first snows of the true north. The air turned sharp, the sky pale as bone. From a high ridge they saw the frost fangs again, their peaks veiled in storm. "The mountain remembers us," Moss-Eye murmured. "Then it will remember our purpose," Leaf said. As they descended into the shadow of the range, a low rumble trembled through the earth. The snow at their feet shifted, rippling like water. Fern gasped. "It's alive." Leaf knelt, pressing her hand to the ground. Beneath the ice, the roots pulsed faintly with green light. "The heart wakes," she whispered. "We are not the only ones who return." And far ahead, deep within the mountain, a voice stirred, slow and hollow as the turning of the ages. "Come, little children," it murmured. "Come and see what your gods have become." Leaf rose slowly, her golden eyes fierce with sorrow and resolve. "Then let us see," she said, "for if the forest must burn, we shall decide how it ends." And beneath the gray sky, the children of the forest began their journey into the heart of the mountain once more, toward the place where the old gods dreamed, and the fate of all that lived was waiting to be rewritten. The path that led back into the frost fangs was one of silence and ghostlight. The snows fell thicker with every step north, cloaking the world in white until even the sky seemed frozen. Leaf walked at the front, her cloak drawn tight against the wind, her golden eyes set upon the distant peaks. Moss-Eye followed close behind, his breath shallow and his staff trembling with every step. Fern moved lightly through the snow, though her small face was drawn with unease. The maester, Corin, brought up the rear, his robes stiff with frost and his eyes wary of the shadows that flitted at the edge of sight. The mountains loomed before them like the bones of sleeping giants. All sound was swallowed by the wind, save for a low hum that came from deep within the earth, steady and slow, like the heartbeat of some hidden god. "Do you hear it?" Fern whispered, her breath steaming in the cold. Leaf nodded grimly. "The sleeper calls to us," Corin shivered. "If it is calling, it already knows we are here. We may yet turn back." Moss-Eye's voice rasped like dry leaves. "No, there is no turning now. The past has already chosen our road." They crossed the frozen rivers where the ice cracked underfoot, then wound through gorges so narrow that even Fern could barely squeeze between the walls of stone. When at last they emerged into the high valley beyond, the air was still and heavy with frost. It was there, half buried in snow, that they found the remains of the wildlings who had once followed Alistair Roxton. Dozens of bodies lay scattered around the mouth of the cave, some frozen mid-step, others half-turned to stone. Their faces were locked in expressions of awe and horror, as though they had glimpsed something divine at the moment of death. Fern turned away, trembling. The forest did this? Leaf knelt beside one of the bodies. The man's skin had grown pale as birch bark. His eyes turned milky white. She touched his cheek and drew her hand back at once. The flesh was warm beneath the ice. "No," she said softly. "They still live, in part. The roots have claimed them." Corin frowned, kneeling beside her. "The transformation is spreading. The magic has found flesh. It is weaving itself into life." Moss-Eye bowed his head. "Then the Meister has become the heart of the mountain." They entered the cave. The air within was thick and wet, heavy with the scent of sap and decay. The walls pulsed faintly with green light, and the sound of water dripped endlessly from unseen heights. As they descended, the glow grew stronger until the darkness gave way to a vast cavern, larger than any hall of man or king. In its center stood the weirwood. It had grown monstrous since they last beheld it. Its trunk rose high as a tower. Its roots spread across the floor like veins of living stone. The red leaves shimmered faintly, and from its hollow mouth poured a soft green mist. Within the mist stood a shape, tall, shifting, human, and yet not. "Alistair," Leaf whispered. The figure turned. Its eyes burned with light, its face neither flesh nor bark, but something between. "Leaf," it said, and the cavern trembled with the sound. "You have come at last." Moss-Eye raised his staff. "You have broken the balance," he said. "You were warned." "I have broken nothing," Alistair answered, his voice calm, almost sorrowful. "I have fulfilled it. The forest remembers through me now. I am the bridge between man and root, mind and memory. Through me, the world will be made whole." Leaf stepped forward. "You would make yourself a god." "A god?" Alistair smiled faintly. "No, a voice. The gods have slept too long, while men tear the earth and the children hide in shadows. I would wake them." "And what then?" Corin demanded. "Would you burn the world to light your altar?" The half-formed man regarded the maester with something like pity. "You of the citadel chained the world with reason and called it mercy. I would break those chains, let men remember wonder and fear." The ground shuddered beneath them. The roots of the weirwood stirred, coiling through the stone like serpents. The cavern walls bled light, and faces appeared within the bark, countless, shifting, crying out in voices not their own. Fern clutched Leaf's hand. "He's becoming everything." Leaf felt it too, the pull of the magic, the hunger of the roots. She could feel them inside her mind, whispering of eternity, of unity, of endless green life. "No," she whispered. "Not this way." She drew the obsidian dagger from her belt, its edge black as night. Moss-Eye stepped beside her, raising his hands. Together, they began to chant the words of binding, ancient, heavy syllables that carried the weight of the Dawn Age. The roots hesitated, writhing in confusion. Alistair's form flickered. "You cannot stop what you are part of." Leaf's voice rose over the roar. "We are not part of you. You are a wound in the song, not its harmony." She drove the dagger into the nearest root. A shock wave of green fire burst outward, throwing her to the ground. Fern screamed. Moss-Eye fell to his knees, blood trickling from his eyes. The weirwood wailed, a sound of anguish that filled the mountain. Light poured from every crack and vein, blinding and beautiful. The roots recoiled, curling inward like burning paper. When the brilliance faded, the cavern was still. The tree stood silent once more, its leaves pale and brittle. The mist was gone. Leaf rose slowly, her limbs trembling. At the foot of the weirwood lay Alistair's body, fully human again, pale and still. His eyes were open, fixed upon the roots above, yet there was peace in his face. Fern wept softly beside him. "Is it over?" Corin knelt, pressing a hand to the man's chest. "His heart has stopped. Whatever he became, it ended with him." Moss-Eye leaned upon his staff, his strength nearly spent. "Magic cannot die. It only changes its shape." Leaf gazed upon the silent tree. "Then may it take a gentler form." They left the cave as the storm broke above the mountains. Snow and ash fell together, whitening the world anew. Behind them, the mouth of the cavern shuddered and collapsed, sealing the path forever. At the ridge above, they stopped to look back one last time. The peaks glimmered in the dawn light, serene, unbroken, as though nothing had ever stirred beneath them. Fern turned to Leaf. "What happens now?" Leaf's eyes were distant, filled with sorrow and hope alike. "Now the forest will sleep again. But dreams are long, and the roots run deep. One day, the song will rise once more, and we will not be there to hear it. They walked south beneath the first pale sun of spring, leaving only their footprints in the snow. Behind them, buried deep within the heart of the mountain, the roots pulsed faintly, once, twice, like the echo of a heartbeat. And far to the south, in a quiet godswood near Winterfell, a weirwood stirred in its sleep. A drop of red sap fell upon the ground and vanished into the earth. The trees remembered. Always, they remembered. The snows melted slowly that spring, and from the frozen north to the green fields beyond the neck, the rivers began to stir with life once more. Yet though the land woke, the children of the forest walked through it as shadows. The mountains behind them had sealed their secret, but the air still carried whispers of that terrible light beneath the stone. For many days they journeyed south, through forest and fen, until the mountains were no more than distant ghosts. The world grew softer here, more human. Ruined villages dotted the land, smoke rose from distant hearths, and the cries of crows echoed over the fields. Moss-Eye's strength had begun to fail. He leaned heavily on his staff, his blind eyes pale as frost. "My roots grow thin," he murmured one evening as they camped beneath a willow. "This body was never meant for so many winters." Leaf knelt beside him, laying a small hand upon his shoulder. "Rest, old friend. The forest will remember you when you are gone." He smiled faintly. "It remembers everything. That is both its blessing and its curse." Fern sat apart, gazing at the stars reflected in the river. "Will the trees forgive us?" she asked softly. "For what we did beneath the mountain?" Leaf looked up at the endless sky. "If there is forgiveness in this world, it is the kind that takes time to grow." They followed the river for 2 more days before coming upon a small keep of stone, half ruined, overgrown with ivy and moss. A single banner hung above its gate, the cloth torn and faded, yet the sigil still visible. A gray direwolf upon a white field. Fern's eyes widened. "The Wolf of the North." "Aye," Leaf said. "The mark of the Starks." The keep was quiet, seemingly abandoned, yet a faint trail of smoke drifted from one of its chimneys. They approached cautiously. At the gate stood a lone man, tall and broad, his hair dark as raven's wings. His sword was strapped across his back, though his hand rested lightly upon its hilt. He saw them first, and his eyes widened, though not in fear. "By the gods," he whispered, "children of the forest." Leaf inclined her head. "And you, a Stark, the blood of the wolves still runs strong." The man bowed low. "Benyar Stark, once of the Watch. I remember your face." Leaf smiled faintly. "You remember our kind, though most men would forget." Benyar gestured toward the hall. "Come inside. The night grows cold, and my hearth is small, but honest." They entered the keep. Inside, the walls were lined with carved faces, rough depictions of the old gods, though none could match the grace of true weirwoods. A single fire burned in the hearth, casting a warm, flickering light. Over bread and broth, Benyar spoke. "After the long night, the north was shattered. The Watch rebuilds the wall, though fewer men take the black each year. Lords quarrel over stone and snow, while the wild still prowls beyond. The wild will always prowl," Moss-Eye said quietly. "The world's heart beats strongest in the untamed places." The Stark's gaze lingered on the old green seer. "And you, elder, your eyes see what mine cannot. Has the darkness truly ended?" Leaf's voice was soft. "The long night is over, but what sleeps beneath the roots is never gone. The fire that woke it still burns, in men's hearts, in the greed for knowledge, in the hunger for power." Benyar looked into the flames. then the wall will not hold forever. No wall holds forever, Leaf said. They remained there for a time, resting, though none truly felt at peace. Each night, Leaf dreamed of the mountain, the cavern, the roots, the weirwood's hollow eyes, and always, beneath it all, a pulse, steady, faint, and endless. On the 7th night, she woke to find Moss-Eye gone. She followed the faint trail of his footprints to the godswood behind the keep. There, beneath a small weirwood, he knelt, his staff laid before him. He turned as she approached, his blind eyes shining. "It is time." Leaf shook her head. "No, you cannot." He smiled. "The song calls to me. I have heard it my whole life, and now it wishes to take me home. You must let me go." Tears welled in her eyes, though they froze before falling. "Then I will remember." "As will I," he whispered. He placed a hand upon the tree's trunk. The weirwood's red leaves stirred though no wind blew. Light gathered around him, pale and soft, until he seemed no more than a shimmer among the roots. When it faded, the staff lay where he had knelt, but Moss-Eye was gone. Fern came running moments later, breathless. "Leaf! Where is he?" Leaf pointed to the staff. "He is home now." The child sank to her knees, clutching the cold wood. "Will he dream?" "He already does." They left the keep at dawn, though Benyar begged them to stay. "The world beyond grows cruel," he said. "There is safety here, for a time." Leaf shook her head. "We do not belong to stone or hearth. The forest calls us still." Before they parted, the Stark gave them a small token, a carved wolf of weirwood, smooth and white as bone. "May the old gods watch your path," he said. "And yours," Leaf answered. "The wolves are the forest's memory made flesh." Guard that memory well. They journeyed south again, through meadows and marsh, where spring's first green began to bloom. For a while, the world seemed gentler. Fern laughed when she found a fox den, and Leaf felt, for the first time in many moons, a quiet hope stirring in her chest. But peace is a fragile thing in Westeros. On the 10th day, they came upon a burned village. Smoke still rose from the ashes, and the air stank of death. Men in mail scoured the ruins, their banners marked by a golden lion. Fern gasped. "Lannisters." Leaf drew her cloak tight. "Stay hidden." They watched from the tree line as the soldiers dug through the wreckage. One of them laughed as he pulled a broken idol of the old gods from the fire. "Worthless wood," he said, tossing it aside. Leaf's anger flared, but she said nothing. Fern, trembling beside her, whispered, "Why do they burn the gods?" "Because they fear what remembers them," Leaf said. That night, they buried what dead they could, beneath an ancient oak at the edge of the forest. As they worked, the wind carried faint voices, sobs, prayers, perhaps the echo of the dying. Fern's tears fell upon the earth. "We can't save them all." Leaf placed a hand upon her shoulder. "No, but we can bear witness. The trees will remember their names when no one else will." When they finished, Leaf stood before the oak and whispered a single word in the old tongue. The leaves rustled, and for a moment, the air smelled of sap and spring. The next morning, as they departed, Fern looked back at the hill where the grave lay. A single shoot had sprouted there overnight, a sapling, white as bone, its leaves tinged red. "The forest remembers," she murmured. Leaf nodded. "Always." And as they walked onward beneath the warming sun, neither saw the eyes that watched them from the ashes, the pale, gleaming eyes of something that should not have been awake, whispering in the voice of the roots, "The song is not yet done. Summer came late to the north that year. The snows lingered in the shadows of the woods, and cold mist clung to the rivers like breath upon glass. Yet the sun grew stronger with each passing day, and green crept back into the gray world. The children moved through it quietly, unseen by men, following the slow heartbeat of the earth. Leaf led them south, away from war and ruin, though no place in Westeros was truly untouched. Fern walked beside her, clutching the small weirwood wolf that Benyar Stark had given them. She turned it in her hands as they walked. "Do you think he remembers us?" she asked softly. Leaf smiled faintly. "Wolves remember everything, especially those who show them kindness." Fern's eyes were bright. "Then we are not alone." "Not alone," Leaf agreed, "but not safe either." The rivers they followed wound into lands of man again, fields sown with barley, ruined castles mended stone by stone, roads alive with carts and weary travelers. Leaf and Fern hid whenever men came near. The world of humans was a noisy one, filled with the clatter of wheels and the sting of iron. In the high fields of the north, they found a camp of soldiers marching under a white banner marked with 7-pointed stars. They wore armor polished bright as moonlight, and their priests walked among them, chanting hymns to the seven. The smell of incense drifted on the wind, sharp and strange. Leaf crouched among the trees, watching. "The faith returns," she murmured. "It rises again like weeds after rain." Fern frowned. Why would they come here? The old gods guard this land. They seek to drive those gods away, Leaf said. The faith of the seven has long feared what it cannot name. They moved on quickly, keeping to the forest. Yet that night, as they camped by the riverbank, a faint sound reached them. Drums, distant and deep. Then the smell of smoke. When dawn came, the sky glowed red. They climbed the nearest ridge and saw it, a godswood in flames. The heart tree stood in the center, its branches ablaze, its red leaves curling into ash. Around it, men in white cloaks raised their swords, crying praises to their gods. Fern gasped. "They're burning the weirwoods." Leaf's voice was hollow. "The faith calls it cleansing." For a long while they watched in silence. The crackle of fire filled the air, and the screams of dying birds echoed through the forest. Fern trembled. "Can't we stop them?" Leaf's gaze was steady, though her hands clenched. "If we strike, more will come. Men breed faster than trees grow." Fern turned away, tears streaking her small face. "Then the old gods will die." Leaf's golden eyes softened. "Gods cannot die. They only sleep until the world remembers their songs." That night, they buried the ashes of the burned weirwood in silence. The moon shone pale above, and the river carried their prayers away. But far to the east, other fires burned, brighter, larger, and not of men's making. Strange lights flickered in the sky, green and gold, like the auroras of old. The ravens flew restless that summer, their cries sharper, their eyes reflecting emerald flame. The world was stirring again. As the weeks passed, the children followed the rivers toward the vale, where mountains rose once more, though gentler than the Frostfangs. They found caves there, hidden among the cliffs, and within them faint traces of their kin, old carvings, dried leaves, and the bones of long-dead singers. Fern knelt beside one of the carvings. It showed a circle of trees surrounding a blazing sun. "What does it mean?" Leaf brushed the dust from it. "It tells of a promise, the first pact, the day when the children and the first men swore peace before the old gods. That peace was long forgotten, but the land remembers still." As they lingered in the cave, the air began to change. The torches flickered, though no wind stirred. The walls pulsed faintly with light, the same green glow that had haunted Leaf's dreams since the frost fangs. She stiffened. "It's him," she whispered. Moss Eye had called it before he died. The sleeper would never rest. Now his presence filled the cave like the breath of the earth itself. Fern pressed close to her. "What is it saying?" Leaf closed her eyes. The voice came as a whisper through her bones, not words, but meaning. "You broke the roots, yet the song endures. The fire beneath the world waits for no one." She opened her eyes, heart pounding. "He speaks of the roots, of the weirwoods. They're changing." They left the cave at once and climbed to the high ridge above. From there, Leaf saw it, an endless stretch of green below, alive and moving. The forests were growing faster than nature allowed, spreading like a tide. In their midst, the white branches of new weirwoods rose toward the sky, too many to count. Fern stared in awe. "It's beautiful." "It's wrong," Leaf said quietly. "The forest grows without balance. The roots reach where they should not." The next day they descended into the valley to see for themselves. The trees there were strange, pale, almost translucent, their sap red and thick as blood. When Leaf laid her hand upon one, a surge of warmth flooded through her. For a moment, she saw visions, men kneeling before the trees, whispering prayers not in the old tongue, but in the speech of the citadel. Meisters in gray robes carving runes into the bark, their faces shining with green fire. She recoiled. "They are binding the roots again, using them." Fern's voice was small. "Why?" "To make themselves gods." That night they found proof. In a clearing near the river stood a small camp. 3 men worked there, their tents marked with the chain sigil of the citadel. One stood over a great crystal bowl filled with sap that glowed faintly green. Leaf and Fern watched from the shadows as the men spoke. "The substance conducts power," one said. "The same energy we detected in the north." "Roxton was right then," said another. "The old magic was never destroyed, only buried. We can control it now, refine it. The age of superstition ends here." Leaf's eyes burned with anger. "They never learn." Before Fern could answer, the wind shifted. One of the Meisters turned sharply toward the trees. "Who's there?" They fled before discovery, vanishing into the night. When they were far enough, Leaf stopped and pressed a hand to her heart. "They will bring the mountain's curse upon all of Westeros." Fern's face was pale. "What do we do?" "We find the Starks," Leaf said. "They remember the old ways. If any blood still honors the pact, it is theirs." They turned west, toward Winterfell. The journey would be long, but Leaf walked with renewed purpose. As they moved through the dark forests, the trees whispered above them, not with the gentle sigh of the wind, but with a strange, rhythmic pulse, as though the world itself were breathing. And far to the north, where the mountains sealed their secret, the buried roots stirred once more, drinking deep from the blood of the earth. In the heart of that slumbering fire, something smiled, a memory of a man who had once been called Alistair Roxton, and his voice, soft as the rustle of leaves, drifted through the dreaming forests. The song begins again. The road to Winterfell wound through wild country, rolling hills, deep glens, and the remnants of once great woods now fallen to the axe. What trees remained were old and proud, their trunks split by lightning, and their roots drinking deep of forgotten blood. Leaf walked among them with a quiet reverence, her fingers brushing each rough bark as if greeting kin left long unvisited. The wind carried the scent of rain, heavy with the promise of storm. Above, clouds gathered, pale as smoke. "The earth feels restless," Fern said, watching the sky. Like it remembers something terrible. It remembers everything, Leaf replied. Every cut, every fire, every drop of sap or blood. Memory is what gives the land its voice, and now that voice grows louder. They moved north, keeping to the shadows of the trees. Moss Eye's staff, which Leaf carried now, hummed faintly in her grasp. The old wood was alive still, resonant with the song of the roots. At times she thought she heard Moss Eye's voice within it, whispering counsel she could not quite understand. By the third day, they saw the smoke of Winterfell rising in the distance, a dark plume against the gray sky. The castle stood proud as ever, its towers rising from the green like ancient sentinels. The sound of hammers echoed faintly on the wind, for men still mended what war had broken. As they neared the walls, Leaf slowed. "We must be careful," she said. "Men of the South now linger even in the wolf's den. The faith spreads its roots here too." They watched from the tree line. Riders came and went through the gates. Merchants crossed the bridge over the moat. The old Godswood, Leaf saw, still stood within the walls, its great weirwood towering above the stone. Its red leaves were bright, even in the gloom. Fern tugged her cloak close. "Do you think they'll let us in?" "No," Leaf said, "but the trees will." That night, under cover of rain, they crossed the river where the waters ran deep and silent. They climbed the outer wall as shadows, swift and small. By dawn, they reached the Godswood. The air there was cool and damp, filled with the scent of earth and leaves. The heart tree stood at its center, its face long and solemn, its eyes red with sap. Leaf approached it slowly, her steps reverent. "It's older than the walls," she whispered, "older than the kingdom itself." Fern looked up at the carved face. "It feels sad." "All trees grieve," Leaf said, "even those that do not weep." She pressed her hand against the trunk. The wood was warm beneath her palm. The roots stretched deep, whispering faintly through the soil. She felt them reaching north, far beyond the wall, and east, where the new forests had begun to rise. The network of memory stretched across the whole of Westeros, pulsing like a vast, living mind. Then the whispers changed. A voice, faint but unmistakable, spoke through the weirwood. "Leaf." She froze. "You sealed me beneath the mountain," the voice murmured, "but the roots are wide, and memory cannot be chained. The forest is awake. The old gods are no longer yours alone." "Alistair," she breathed. Fern looked at her, alarmed. "Leaf." "Who?" Silence. The voice continued. "Men seek the fire beneath the trees, but they are only instruments. Through them, I return. Through them, I spread. The age of gods and men will end together, reborn as one." Leaf's heart pounded. "You would destroy both. You were never meant to bear such power." "And yet you gave it to me." The whisper came. "The forest chose me when it drank my blood. I am the song now, the root and the flame. You cannot unmake what you have sung." The weirwood's eyes seemed to gleam brighter, the red sap flowing faster. Fern stepped back, frightened. "Leaf, it's bleeding." Leaf withdrew her hand. The ground beneath the tree trembled faintly. All across the Godswood, the leaves began to rustle, though no wind moved. "It's spreading," she said. "The roots are stirring again." Before Fern could speak, the sound of boots echoed beyond the trees. Voices shouted, men's voices. Torches flickered through the foliage. "Guards," Leaf hissed. "Hide." They melted into the shadows, just as two soldiers entered the clearing. Both bore the direwolf of Stark upon their cloaks. "The Maester said the heart tree bled again," one muttered. said the sap flowed red, as if the gods themselves were wounded. Strange days, the other replied. The ravens have been restless too. My wife swears she saw the tree's eyes move. They stood in uneasy silence a moment longer before leaving. When they were gone, Fern emerged, trembling. We can't stay. No, Leaf said, but we cannot flee forever either. If the roots reach here, even Winterfell will not stand untouched. The song of the forest will drown the world. Fern swallowed hard. What do we do? Leaf looked to the weirwood. The sap still ran, red and glistening. We must change the song. She knelt, laying Moss-Eye's staff before the tree. The wood pulsed faintly, answering the heartbeat of the roots. The old green seers bound their power in dreams, she said. If I sleep within the roots, I may reach the heart of the song. I can still speak to it. Fern's eyes widened. You mean to go into the trees? Yes. What if you don't come back? Leaf smiled softly. Then you must remember. She pressed her palm to the earth and began to whisper in the old tongue. The words were slow and deep, filled with the weight of ages. The soil grew soft beneath her hand. The roots of the heart tree shifted, curling around her like gentle serpents. The last thing Fern saw before the earth closed over Leaf's form was her face, serene, eyes shining like sunlight through amber. Then all was still. Days passed. Fern waited in the shadows of the godswood, unseen by men. At night, she heard the whispering of the leaves, low and sorrowful. The sap upon the weirwood's face darkened and dried. On the third night, the wind changed. The trees fell silent. Fern looked up, and the heart tree opened its eyes. They glowed not red, but green, bright as emerald flame. A voice rose from the roots, soft and vast, and filled with both grief and triumph. The song is changed. The branches shivered, the air filled with the scent of spring. Somewhere in the far north, the mountains groaned, and the old fires guttered out. Fern fell to her knees, tears upon her cheeks. Leaf? The wind answered, warm and kind. Remember me. And then the weirwood's glow faded, leaving only the quiet rustle of leaves. When dawn came, the heart tree stood still and silent once more. But its face was different now, the eyes calmer, the mouth curved in peace. Fern rose and placed her small hand upon the trunk. Sleep well, she whispered. The forest will remember. And it did. For though the fires beneath the earth cooled and the voices of men filled the land again, the roots held fast. Deep below, where life and death entwined, the song of the forest endured. Quieter now, gentler, waiting for the next age to begin. The children faded from the world, their numbers few, their stories turned to myth. Yet in every godswood, the red leaves whispered when the wind blew, carrying a name older than kingdoms, older than men. Leaf, the last child of the forest who changed the song of the world. Years passed, and the snows came again to the north. Seasons turned like slow wheels, grinding memory into legend. In time, the deeds of the children of the forest became stories told beside the hearths of men, half believed, softened by distance, tangled with the names of gods and heroes. Few remembered that those stories had once been true. Winterfell endured, as it always had. Lords came and went, wars rose and fell like tides. Yet the godswood remained untouched, its heart tree watching through endless years. The men of the castle swore their oaths beneath its boughs, and its red leaves whispered secrets none but the wind could hear. One morning, long after Leaf's sacrifice, a young girl wandered through the godswood. She was small, with wild brown hair and eyes the color of river stones. Her name was Ara, daughter to the steward, too curious for her years and too brave for her place. She knelt by the pool before the heart tree, gazing at her reflection. The water rippled, though the air was still. "Do you hear me?" she whispered. "They say the gods listen here." The weirwood's carved face looked down upon her, solemn and kind. Its eyes, darkened by age, seemed almost to move. Ara frowned. "I asked if you hear." The water shimmered again. A leaf drifted down from the branches, landing upon the surface. Its veins were gold in the morning light. Ara picked it up carefully. "Strange," she murmured. "You've never dropped gold before." She tucked the leaf into her pocket, unaware that the roots beneath her feet stirred faintly, humming with recognition. Far to the south, the maesters of the citadel wrote of strange happenings, new growth in the northern forests, trees blooming out of season, animals once thought lost returning to the wild. They called it a quirk of the weather, a turn of nature's whim. But in Old Town's oldest vaults, a few gray men remembered the name Alistair Roxton and shivered. The riverlands, too, began to change. Groves long dead burst into leaf again, their roots cracking the stones of forgotten castles. In the Vale, shepherds found saplings of white bark growing in places where no seed could have fallen. And in the Frostfangs, where the mountain had once burned with green light, the snow melted earlier than it should, revealing meadows carpeted with red flowers. The world was healing itself, or perhaps remembering what it once had been. And yet, some nights, travelers spoke of voices in the wind, not cries, not wails, but a low chorus, as if the earth itself was singing. Those who listened too long swore they could make out words in the ancient tongue of the children. In the God's Wood of Winterfell, Ara grew. The years passed gently for her. She loved the quiet places, the whisper of leaves, the cool touch of stone. Her family often found her seated beneath the heart tree, speaking softly to it as if it were an old friend. One evening, when the moon hung full above the towers, she dreamed. In her dream, she walked through a forest vast and green beyond measure. The air was alive with light, and all around her, voices murmured, soft, kind, endless. A figure waited for her beside a weirwood, small, lithe, and ageless, her skin the color of bark, her hair pale as the moon. Her golden eyes gleamed with warmth. "Who are you?" Ara asked. "Once they called me Leaf," the figure said. Ara's breath caught. "You're one of them, a child of the forest." Leaf smiled. "The last, perhaps, but you are of both worlds. The song still runs in your blood." "I don't understand." "You will," Leaf said gently. "The old magic never dies. It sleeps within the roots, waiting for those who can hear. The balance between man and forest is fragile, but not lost. When the time comes, you must remember what was forgotten." Ara reached out, but her fingers passed through Leaf like mist. "Will I see you again?" Leaf's form began to fade, her voice soft as wind through leaves. "In every tree that grows, in every whisper of rain, the forest and its children are one now. We endure together." The dream dissolved into light. When Ara awoke, she found herself lying at the foot of the heart tree. Dawn's first rays filtered through its leaves. At her side lay a small object, a pendant of polished wood shaped like a leaf, its veins inlaid with faint traces of gold. She held it close. The heart tree's eyes seemed to watch her, and though it did not move, she felt warmth radiating from its trunk. Years later, when Ara was grown, she became a keeper of the gods' wood, a watcher of the old ways, though few in Winterfell paid heed. The Meisters called her odd, the knights called her dream-touched. Yet, when she walked through the forests, animals came near, and the trees bent toward her as if greeting an old friend. In her final days, as her hair turned silver and her eyes dimmed, she went once more to the gods' wood. The weirwood's leaves fell around her like crimson snow. She lay down beside its roots and closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. The next morning, when the castle folk came searching, they found no body, only a scattering of golden leaves around the pool. And though none could explain it, the heart tree's face seemed changed. Its eyes, once somber, now shone with quiet joy. That night, a storm passed over the north. Rain fell upon the forests, and the rivers swelled with song. Every heart tree from the wall to the trident stirred, their leaves trembling as if in laughter. The song of the forest had returned, not one of fire and sorrow, but of peace and remembrance. Far beneath the earth, where the roots of the world entwined, Leaf dreamed. She felt the pulse of life in every corner of the land. The wolves running beneath moonlight, the crows calling over the wall, the rivers whispering through the reeds. The world was still wounded, still learning to heal, but it lived. And within that vast green dream, a child's voice echoed softly. "I remember." Leaf smiled in her slumber. "Then all is well," she murmured. "The forest remembers, and so does the blood." The seasons turned again. Winters would come, and summers would fade, and men would build and burn and build anew. But the weirwoods stood eternal, their roots binding past to present, death to life. In their silence was the memory of everything that had been, and the promise of everything yet to come. For in the world of Westeros, the forest endures, and in the heart of the forest, Leaf dreams.